So, on with the program. For the next session, I mentioned defenders at the beginning, and those of you who've met our leader for us, what we call our security and trust organization, John Stewart, will know that we at Cisco take the defense of our own assets and our own customers extremely seriously. And the security and trust organization fulfills a variety of tasks, including data protection, data privacy, including the hardware and software that we sell, and of course, defending Cisco. So I'm delighted to welcome our next guest speaker, who is Glen Maiden. Glen is the National Security Officer for Cisco. He lives outside Canberra, and when he's not involved in defending Cisco, can be found riding horses and chasing cattle on his 130 acres, I think. So please give a big warm welcome to our National Security Officer, Glen Maiden.
Good morning, everybody. This session was meant to be done by a chap called Michael Sheck. Michael runs our CSIRT, so that's basically our internal Cisco defence organisation. He's based in North Carolina, and he tried to get out here as of the weekend and managed to spend 24 hours getting from North Carolina to New Jersey. So unfortunately, Michael can't be here today, but he did send me his slides yesterday. Now, when I went through them, I thought, well, I could go and give his slide deck, but it's actually a little bit of an opportunity lost. So I'm still going to talk about how we defend Cisco, but I'm hoping that we can actually sort of have maybe a little bit more of a broader talk about the environment that we're facing and how we're going to sort of come to terms with this computer network defence thing. So in order to do that, the reason why it is an opportunity lost is I'm only relatively new to Cisco, so I spent most of my career in an organisation called the Australian Signals Directorate. I'll give a bit of a history lesson on that in a moment because I think it's important to talk about sort of where we are compared to where we've been. But I spent a lot of time in this intelligence organisation as a practitioner, as a offensive practitioner. From there, I moved to our Australian Taxation Office, and I was the security advisor for our ATO for about 4 years. So there I was more of an enterprise defender, I should say. So I saw the other side of trying to defend, and interestingly, it was a multi-sourced environment. So we had a whole bunch of managed service providers providing services to the ATO, and it was not always a happy time for us. After I left the ATO, I went to Lockheed Martin and I built the security operations capability for the centralised processing project for defence. A few of you would have heard of that before, but that's basically a $1 billion project where Defence rationalised all their data centres, all their databases, mainframe, mid-range, and a whole bunch of things besides into about 13 data centres and a whole bunch of virtualised capability. So this was working as an integrator for the customer. And now obviously I'm with a vendor. So the reason why this is such an opportunity is now that I'm working with Cisco and trying to do the right thing as a vendor, I've actually seen it from almost all sides. And I actually did, about this time last year, I did a talk for the ACSC about the 10 things I hate about the Australian cybersecurity industry. And while I tried to do it in a little bit of a light-hearted manner, it was basically, why are we less than the sum of our parts? So anyway, so that's what I'm going to try and talk about today. In terms of why the background of an organisation like ASD is really, really important is if you go back to about 1942, and it was the middle of the Second World War, the Japanese were advancing on Australia, sort of coming down sort of through Asia, and then they got to Papua New Guinea. General MacArthur at the time basically got a whole bunch of his radio type units in the Army, Air Force and Navy and put them together, and their mission was to sit together, intercept these signals that were coming from the Japanese, translate them, interpret them, and then give us some intelligence on how we could actually sort of counter that threat. So if you sort of fast forward that sort of 80 odd years, we've gone from trying to collect radio signals, trying to collect whatever information we can about our adversaries, all the way through now to where it's obviously everything's digital and everything's cyber, and that seems to be the almost the front battleground of where everything's going. You'll hear this afternoon from Talos about the Olympic destroyer malware that was in South Korea about 2 weeks ago. Now, I'm not going to steal Talos's thunder, but the interesting thing about that is we've gone now from, all those years ago in 1942 to the point now where we're using cyber as almost that very, very first part of a campaign, and it's completely destructive. There was no intelligence gathering capability within that piece of malware. Nothing. All it was designed to do was go out and kill everything that it can find. So we really, really are on the cusp of the change in our environment. So what I'm going to do today is I'll talk quickly about the Cisco organisation and I guess the scale and the breadth of what we're trying to protect. And I think that'll give you sort of a good idea of what our CSIRT is trying to sort of look after every day. I'll give you a bit of an overview of the number of incidents that we're sort of chasing around and where we're spending our time. And then I'll hopefully do that in a reasonably sort of efficient way, and then we can get into something that's a little bit more conversational and just talk about sort of some of the challenges that we've got. And Brett's talk beforehand was really, really good. I was worried that he was going to be stealing all my thunder, but he's actually laid out a lot of the key issues very, very accurately. We've got big, complex security systems. We've got no people that know how to drive them properly. All that sort of complexity that we need to try and overcome to do really, really good computer network defence. Now, Brett also gave a really, really good sort of anatomy of an attack. I was going to do something a little bit simpler, and I still will. But when I was coming in the plane up here last night, if you go onto Qantas, they've actually got the box set of Mr. Robot. So I started watching those again. Anyway, last night, the company that the hero works for anyway, the bad guys had given a CD full of malware. It was under the disguise of actually being a music CD. So they gave it to one of the employees of this cybersecurity company. Anyway, what they wanted him to do was put it in and then play it on the computer and then release the malware everywhere. So anyway, what happened was he ended up putting on his laptop. They managed to exploit this chap's laptop, pulled a whole bunch of data, personal data, on this employee. And it turns out he was a bit of a rat, so he was having all these affairs and up to all sorts of no good. Anyway, so they pulled all this compromising data and then used that to sort of try and coerce him to go and then put this CD into the company system. Now, interestingly, he fessed up to his girlfriend, and his girlfriend was like, "Oh, that's really, really bad." So she went in. I hope I'm spoilers here. she went in and just said, "Well, this guy's a rat. I'm not having any of this." So she went into the office, used his past, got onto his computer, put the CD in, bang. So the reason why I want to take a little bit of time just to talk through that is when we think back to the last presentation and that anatomy of an attack. Where would that attack been stopped if you want to use the kill train or something like that? What went wrong? And when you think about it, if we've got an endpoint solution, well, that's not going to be on our employees' laptop at home. It's not going to be on their phone. It's not going to be on their tablet. All these different sort of intrusion opportunities that's so hard to get with a silver bullet. So in terms of Cisco, as an organisation, 138,771 users across the globe. I think there's about 50,000 that are contractors. The rest of the users are permanent. Operating in 102 countries, 343 cities, and 600 offices. We've got 73,162 mobiles that we look after using an MDM, and 2,370 labs. Now, if you think about Mr. Robot, we've all got managed endpoints, and we know what's executing on them. And you look at the ASD policies, like use application whitelisting. That's not what our engineers need to do. They need to be able to pull software down. They need to be able to rapidly install stuff. So some of these really, really basic capabilities that we need to do just to get our business done break a lot of our security models, and this is why it makes it quite hard. I read last week, I think it was, that China's going to develop an unhackable network. So this is apparently what they're going to do. So yeah. I'm sure that there won't be a lot of functionality in that network. We still need to support our business. We've got 127,454 endpoints. We've got, in terms of infrastructure endpoints, routers, switches, and other security infrastructure, 194,875. We've got 4,474 admin accounts. And again, going back to the old minimise your domain admins and minimise all your privileged accounts. We've got 4,500 of them. 13,096 service accounts operating in 13 data centres. We've got extranet partners, people that come in from the outside into Cisco to do work, 318. Brett mentioned before about us not just being a Cisco shop, so we do eat our own dog food. We're mostly a Cisco shop in terms of how we defend Cisco, but in terms of other vendors, 2,690 across the globe of other vendors that we actually use their products or use their capabilities. In the case of some of our products, so things like StealthWatch was LAN code back in the day. We liked it so much we bought it. So in a lot of cases, we'll OpenDNS Umbrella is another good example of that. So again, we'll try this sort of stuff. If we really like it, we'll acquire it and then make it Cisco. In other cases, not. We've got 13,889 business groups. We've got 296 cloud services and 8 acquisitions a year. So in terms of buying up other organisations, we will buy up on average 8 a year. Some of them might have really, really good security. Some of them might have SDLC all the way through. Some maybe not. So again, we've got a fairly big challenge that we have to sort of address. Now, in terms of, I guess, where we sit and where CSIRT sits, it was mentioned before, so I work in what's known as the Security and Trust Office, which is underneath John Stewart. So it's basically the defend Cisco mission is for us. We do what we call defend Cisco as, I guess, mission number 1. But what we sort of worked out a few years ago was, well, that's well and good, but how do we actually sort of capture the value from that? So things like Talos, things like CISA, all the best practices, all that sort of really, really good IP that we're developing through defending a system as big as I've just described. We then try and sort of pull that out and then push that to the broader Cisco against all of our employees. This is how you would not leave a Amazon bucket without a password, all that sort of stuff. So we go out and sort of try and push that sort of security story to the rest of Cisco, but then we also pull that and embed that into our product lines for the future. So the idea is, yes, we defend Cisco, but we also try and make sure that we get the absolute maximum ROI on the work that we do. Now, in terms of CSIRT as an organisation, I mentioned before, so we've got in STL, we've got privacy, we've got some security engineering, we've got our data protection capability. This is what's really, really sensitive IP, this is not. We've got some intelligence operations, we've got some marketing, and we've also got our CSIRT people. So in terms of CSIRT, it's sort of structured into 4 main teams: intelligence and research, threat operations, investigations, and engineering. Now, here's something interesting for you. In terms of numbers, intelligence and research, 41 staff. In terms of investigations, 14. In terms of engineering, 25. And threat operations, 4. So if you look at a lot of the certs that are around the place where there's people running around responding to threats and basically doing incident response, realistically, that's sort of 14. So we're looking at maybe about 15% is actually in that reactive space. Most of it is in that proactive space. So that's that really intelligence, threat-driven defence model is working inside here. So we use, as I said before, we use Cisco Toolkit. The web security appliance, that blocks 242 million threats per day. Email security appliance, 229 million. We use StealthWatch again for that east-west type lateral movement to detect that. That's one area that is quite difficult to find, whether you're looking at the endpoint or the gateway, like most people do. So that's what we use StealthWatch for. We use Tetration, we use ThreatGrid, we use next generation IPS, and we use OpenDNS Umbrella. So that OpenDNS blocks 421 million malicious command and control or malicious events every day. OpenDNS is probably one of my favourite Cisco products in terms of just being able to bolt it on the top of your organisation, no engineering, no overhead, it just works. So it's really, really good. We actually, 2 weeks ago, we plugged it into a customer that had everything. It had had firewalls, it had intrusion detection, it had SOEs, it had host-based firewalls, it had antivirus, you name it, it had the whole lot. We plugged in Umbrella, and it's got this nice little statistic thing where it goes tick, 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 tick. Anyway, at 9 o'clock when everyone came into work, there was literally 41 malicious, in this network, wasn't that big, 41 malicious command and controls beaconing out to their servers that we stopped at that point. So again, really, really effective, different way of doing security. In terms of the types of incidents, last year we had 971 incidents. And I really like Brett's point. It's really, really important, I think, in the context of this discussion. We always arguably overemphasise the importance of the detective or the preventative side of security. More so now than ever, I think that's it's the reactive side, or it's the minimise the impact side of security that's not really getting the focus it should. So if you look at things like network segregation and sort of some of these other areas like that, we've shown over the last few years that pure prevention just doesn't work. We've tried. So the idea now is we can't not prevent. We still have to do that. But if we can sort of minimise the amount of time that the bad guys have to be able to do damage throughout our systems, then that's really, really important. Now, from a Cisco perspective, the number keeps changing. Last I heard was between 2 and 4 hours. But if we have an incident, it's detected and sorted out within 4 hours. As you know, the industry average is somewhere up around that 100 days. So, but from our perspective, 4 hours is when it's all cleaned up. So that's well above where it should be. We also, of those 971 incidents, one of the interesting things was that 50% of those were in India. We have a lot of development that happens in India. And I think, again, that's where this flexibility side of it needs to come in. So we've got a lot of development teams. They need that flexibility, but over half of all of our incidents were coming from this sort of development environment. Interestingly too, the cost of those was about $1,812 per infection. All right, so now the final bit, and I'm looking at the time, I've probably taken too long, have I? No, it's all right. So the final bit is like, so what? So what are we doing about this? Now, when we go out and talk to people, we'll say, well, this is how we do our computer network defence. We've got a playbook, and here's all our plays. And a lot of customers will say, well, give me all those plays. So we can, but in almost every case, it's not actually that relevant. So it's all, we've got a book which is called Crafting the InfoSec Playbook. So that gives the theory behind it, which is really, really good. But in terms of our plays, it's about the threat, and it's about the infrastructure that we've got, and it's about the policies and procedures and processes and the people that we've got inside Cisco. So we've got about 240 plays that we actually set off deliberately every single day to go out and sort of capture malicious activity sort of as it happens. So it's a really, really powerful and different way of doing security, but it's not going to be right for everybody. One of the other things that I want to just probably put in your heads before I sort of open to questions, some of the advice that we give out in terms of government about what to do to protect your networks, it's not all, we give it out as a one-size-fits-all type advice, but I don't know if that's necessarily the best way of doing it. So if you look at for example, the ASD top 4, patch, reduce admin privileges and whitelist. Now, patching, I'm not going to argue with that. That's really good. Reduce admin privileges. Well, I've got 14,500 admins in Cisco that I haven't been able to get pushed down any more than that. And whitelisting as well. Now, if I was a really, really big, really mature organisation like Cisco, then whitelisting might make a lot of sense. But what if I'm a small to medium enterprise or smaller? They might have 1 or 2 or 3 maybe security people. I think you'd be insane to try and do whitelisting. You would be better off using, for example, one of our threat grid sandbox appliances is where you're doing blacklisting, and then you've got the power of that global telemetry blowing it up, and unless you're patient zero, you're actually pretty much protected after that first person's hit. So that's a lot lower cost. And if we go back to Brad's point, which was absolutely on the money, finding really, really good security people to be able to interpret it and respond to these events it's hard. So, automate absolutely where you can, but don't I guess try and make it too hard for yourself by making these people run around doing some really, really, really I guess quite massive sort of security projects. Do you want to throw a question to me now? Has anyone got one? It's always, we just need the first person. Yes, sir.
All right, I'll give that one a go. Apologies, maybe I didn't quite hear the last bit that you said, so apologies if I repeat what you already mentioned. But you said you run something like 200 playbooks. Is that your speak for saying we continuously just train and trial, or are you also just trying to, I guess, surprise and see if the organization works? What's sort of your sophistication around that? So
it's about 220 plays. So we've got one playbook with all these plays in it, and it might be, for example, WannaCry. Okay, well, it's got these indicators of compromise. We've got, in our case, we've got might have an intrusion detection system. We might have OpenDNS, and we might have StealthWatch. So if we want to run a play against the WannaCry threat, we will say, okay, well, if we see this, this, and this in these three disparate systems, then this is the action we're going to take. Now, these are pushed out daily, every single day. As I said, it's not going to be for everyone. It depends on what infrastructure that you've got in your environments. I'd like to, is there anyone else that wants to talk? Because I like to try and be a little bit positive. Sometimes it actually seems quite negative when you talk about some of these things, but some of the advice that I like to give that's just free and easy. If you can get on top of patching, and I always say that it's a change management problem more than a security problem, but if you can manage to get on top of patching, that's really going to get you a lot of bang for the buck. Backups is always something, and test your backups. That's always something. I'm telling everyone what they already know, but backups is critical. See if you can get to multi-factor authentication as soon as possible, and educate your users. So tell them not to click. Now, I always feel that us security people are a little bit condescending when we go and talk to our users and say, "Oh, you're an idiot. You just clicked on that, get a free iPhone type of link." But I think if we go in there and not being adversarial and just say, "Look, well, this is why it's a problem. This is why you've got to be really careful." Train them not necessarily about the specific threat, but train them about understanding the context of why someone would be trying to hack them, essentially.
No further questions for Glen. Thank you very much to Glen Maiden, everybody.